Davis Mattek is a content creator at SportsGrid, host of the TakeCast, and co-host of the Roto Grinders Swolecast. He's a best ball bro, a skater, a tie-dye shirt and bucket hat wearer, and he'll always be fantasy football's little brother. These are his late-round perspectives. This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. There's no better place to play best ball than at Underdog. There are leagues starting all the time, and you can choose whether you want to do a slow draft or a fast one when entering one of those leagues. And you don't just have to play Best Ball Mania to play best ball at Underdog. There's a wide variety of contests to choose from. You can even check out Underdog's other games as well, like Pick'em. Right now, you can get in on the action with a deposit offer and free copy of the late round draft guide just by signing up and depositing. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app. When you sign up, use promo code LATEROUND and make a deposit for a deposit offer and a free copy of the late round draft guide. That guide will then be emailed to you when it launches on July 1st. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show. Every time I do one of these perspectives episodes, I like the thing, like right before I bring someone on to start talking, I always think about like my relationships with those people, like how long I've known them, all that kind of stuff. And I always like open the show, talking about like, oh, I've never met you before in real life, or, oh, do you remember when this thing happened? And I'm thinking about you, and I'm like it's been like what, 12 or 13 years now that we've known each other?
14 years, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. You started out, how old were you when you started doing fantasy content?
18. Yeah. My freshman year of college.
It's so wild. You were the sports wonderkind back in the day.
The sports wonderkind. People are saying it more and more all the time. Good thing I didn't stick with that branding, because a 32-year-old man calling himself the wonderkind, it's really good that I moved on from that.
You had, but you're sort of like fantasy football's little brother to our generation of fantasy analysts, right? Like yes. Now you're older in the space to some. I mean, you're not like old by any means, but like you're obviously not, a 20 or early 20 something, doing this fantasy content thing. The first
Correct.
time I met you though, in real life, we had known each other on Twitter and stuff like that. I think was in San Francisco at one of the it was FSTA at the time, yeah. And you were wearing the classic tie-dye shirt and bucket hat at the conference, as most people do at
just kind of what it was sort of the style at the time. Was sort of the sort of bucket hat, weed socks, tie-dye. I mean, obviously, it served me well because it was such a memorable performance that people still remember it. A decade later. It's just like what I was. 22, 23. I was looking to make a wave, and the wave was made, JJ. The wave was made.
It definitely was. But like, look, you and I both, you went through your 20s knowing me. You saw most of my 20s. You're a different human being when you're sort of in your 20s. Then you graduate your 20s, you get into your 30s, you settle down a little bit more, you mature more. We're not out on the Twitter streets anymore getting in arguments about Rachaad Jennings and stuff.
Rachaad Jennings. Oh my God. You want to talk about remember a guy? Rachaad Jennings. Yeah. That's a good. I thought you were going to go with Vincent Brown.
Oh, Vincent Brown's a great one. I also have old audio clips from me making fun of your auto-tune voice.
The Doran Dickerson?
Yeah,
I hope it still lives.
I have one where I make fun of you talking about Doran Dickerson, and then I also have one wishing you a happy birthday. It's probably like your 19th birthday at the time.
Probably my 19th birthday.
Yeah, but I have one that was like you saying like, homeboy Doran Dickerson's the man. Have you seen his 40 time? But it was in like an auto-tune voice because...
Bro, homeboy Doran Dickerson is the man. Have you seen his 40 time?
Those were the days, man. Those were the days.
I for a while I had that bookmarked on my computer just because I thought it was so funny.
Yeah, I know. I would try to throw it out. I think Cordero Patterson, there was one about him, just to show you how long that dude's been in the NFL.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. But anyway, like you used to love the guys like Doran Dickerson back in the day. You infamously were very against like the OBJ archetype and stuff.
Oh, God.
And look, I'm not here to
long enough time. You know what? Long enough timeline on Odell Beckham Jr. I was right. Let's just be honest, everyone. And let's just be 100% real about it. I was right. Sammy Watkins and Odell Beckham stunk, and they always stunk.
Yeah. Well, you had a different process back then. I'm not saying this to like poo-poo you as an analyst. I'm saying this.
It's just so different.
It was so different. Whenever we would look at things back in the day, you had sort of like the roto-viz mentality, with your prospecting work and such. How would you, as a fantasy analyst today, how would you describe your process? Because you were once the big wide receiver guy. I'm going to ignore the sub 200 pound dudes. I just want these 6'3", 210 pound dudes. Has it changed? I know that it's changed, but sort of how would you describe your process nowadays as an analyst?
I mean, the joking answer is that it's vibes based. It's like I'm just kind of vibing. The real answer is that best ball has changed so much of this stuff because you are actually risking so much money per year. Whereas like 10 years ago, I'd play some leagues, I'd make some bets with people.
Yeah.
I mean, this was before you could even win $1 million in the main event. It was just a much different space. So it's like, honestly, it's more market based now, where it's like I'm kind of letting the market dictate decisions for me and then picking and choosing spots where I think the market is wrong or right. And then really, kind of the antithesis of what our whole bit was at RotoViz in 2014 was like picking outliers, because outliers are actually how you win. Sure. Really. Definitely still numbers based. Like I like a lot of the targets per route run, yards per route run, rushing yards. Actually, with running backs, I just don't care about talent hardly at all. Like very, very minimally. Yeah. Whereas I would have argued with someone about that. So yeah, really, I would say it's honestly mostly market based. Is kind of how I view all these games now.
And don't sell yourself short. You did do the Marquise Wilson breakdown on your website back in 2010, 2011 time frame. Don't forget that. I've definitely seen you grow as an analyst, obviously, but I think that's going to naturally happen whenever you're starting, when you're 18 years old and you're your brain isn't even fully developed at that time, right? And now you can like sit back and think a little bit more thoughtfully about your approach to things. Rookie drafts, you and I are in a ton of dynasty leagues together.
Yeah, we are.
They're now in the rear view. Really frustrating playing. Like I'm in so many industry dynasty leagues, and it's really frustrating because people just are sharp and they look at they'll look at rankings and stuff, and like it's just it's. You don't really get a gift in these industry rookie drafts. You pretty much know once you get the pick who you're gonna get. Like there's not really. In fact, I probably of all the leagues we're in, I'm probably of like me and Leone and Thorman is in these leagues and Corain is in these leagues and Sean Siegel's in the. I'm probably the one who's most likely to go away from ADP or a Chiefs player. Like literally it's really as simple as it gets. Yeah, we are in one that I commish with some buddies and stuff, which we started like 5 or 6 years ago. We don't have any picks in that league. That was created to get people into Dynasty. It's called Dynasty Virgins is the league name. And that one will sometimes get stranger ADPs and stuff just because they're not folks that are and it's not tight end premium either. Exactly. So but rookie drafts are in the rear view for the most part. I still have a couple left. They're just kind of dragging. But what was something that you saw in rookie drafts this year that you thought was just wild, that you thought was crazy? Two things. So the first one is Jonathan Brooks going ahead of Bo Nix. I mean, look, I get, it's not that I don't get it. It's like, oh, Jonathan Brooks, he's this good prospect. He's like got like no competition. But it's like the what do you win when you win thing. And it's like, okay, well, if Bo Nix starts his entire rookie contract for the Denver Broncos, you passed on a guy you could immediately flip for a first and like probably get decent points out of for the next 4 to 5 years for a running back who, what is Jonathan Brooks's rookie pick value going to be in 2027? Well, this is a good question to ask because I'm someone who is on the side of Jonathan Brooks was undervalued. Like the versus Bo Nix is a different discussion to me. Like I did a lot of research on, how quarterbacks accumulate in value from year 1 to year 2, especially whenever they're, higher draft picks and stuff. And like, it's crazy. Like Bo Nix could be horrible in year 1 and still have decent startup and decent capital.
Zach Wilson got more expensive year 2 than year 1.
Right. Exactly. Kenny Pickett did or Kenny Pickett at least had a similar ADP from year 1 to year 2. And so, from that perspective, I totally understand it. But I think overall with Jonathan Brooks, I think that he was a value in rookie drafts this year. And I think that he was a little bit I think he was a little bit undervalued. But I do think the big question with Brooks, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this. I think the big question is if this ACL is a problem in year 1 in any way, shape, or form, and he doesn't perform up to the standard, right?
Yeah.
What's going to happen to his value entering year 2? Because we can all sit back and say, oh, I know Jonathan Brooks tore his ACL. I know that he's not going to perform that well in year 1, but we also know that we get impatient, right? It's no different than when you draft someone in season long and they start out slow, even though they face like a really, really tough schedule. You're still second guessing that player, right? And my question to you would be, do you think that the dynasty market is going to second guess Jonathan Brooks, or do you think they're going to be like, look, cool it. We knew that year 1 was going to be maybe questionable, and we saw that it was a little bit questionable, and so we can still buy into that heading into year 2.
No, it'll be a value decrease for sure. Like let's say he gets 174 carries, 42 receptions, something like that as a split of touches. Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders are still involved to some degree. Dave Canales doesn't fix Bryce Young. I mean, that's the other thing is sure, we can be talent agnostic, but like, this is the team that he's on. I mean, we know good teams with winning records are more likely to produce good fantasy running backs than bad losing teams. I think you see a pretty significant, I think it maybe could be something like how we viewed Kenneth Walker at the end of last season to the end of the 2023 season, where like they take Charbonnet. He kind of is really not that good last season. He falls like a good bit. I mean, best case scenario, I think for him is something like what happened with Rachaad White, where he doesn't really play as a rookie, doesn't play well. The price falls as a third round. I mean, he was a second round pick. Rachaad White was a third round pick. And then 2025, he's healthy, the knee's good to go. And you actually end up like it ends up being a huge win. But if he does not play well as a rookie, he is going to lose value by quite a bit, I think.
Did you fade? Are you fading Jonathan Brooks in every format right now?
No. I think he's actually a little bit underpriced in best ball, just based on the odds of like the ACL's fine.
Right. Exactly.
His competition is so poor.
Right.
I actually liked Chuba Hubbard as a prospect. If you want to really turn the clock back. But like, he's just like fine. I mean, I like Rachaad White as a prospect too. Like, he's just fine. But Brooks is like a B+ level prospect, I think, without the ACL. And I mean, he's going after like Tony Pollard and Najee Harris, and it's like, just in that range, I'm taking him for sure.
Yeah, I think he's one of those players. I talked about it on Becoming a Best Ball Bro this week, where he's this past week I've been drafting him a lot, just given the way the drafts have sort of unfolded for me. But I think he's one of those players where you could see, in May when you're drafting and in early June, you're trying to just find guys, especially who can appreciate and value over the summer, right? Like, you want guys who you can get right now at RB 28 who turn into RB 19 once July hits. And I think he's one of those potential players, just because if he steps out on the field and, oh, wow, he's actually pretty healthy, then his ADP is going to skyrocket, because a player, an RB1 in his class who had pretty good draft capital, who, didn't fall to like a premier spot per se, but it's not a horrible one. And Dave Canales did what he did last year with Rachaad White. I mean, like, there's a lot of favorable things surrounding. And Brooks, to me, was a really, really good prospect. Like, I thought that he was at least like, I shouldn't say really, like, it wasn't like Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs, but he was like Kenneth Walker, Javonte Williams. He's
like the next tier from that.
Yeah. And so, like, if all of those things sort of align, and then historically we see rookie running backs just be really, really good values, I think that Brooks can really become a value here in 2024. What was the other thing that you wanted to call out with your rookie drafts?
Oh, Ben Sinnott is actually going too low in these tight end premium leagues that we do because, and this almost always happens when the prospect, when it's the one guy I really remember it happening with was Cole Kmet, but Freiermuth did too, where you're like the first or second tight end drafted in kind of a weird, bad tight end class. It's almost like Brock Bowers is like a different guy, but I mean, Sinnott kind of landed in like the nut spot where it's like, they don't really even have a second wide receiver. Like if you're a big Dotson guy, maybe you're a big Luke McCaffrey guy, they're going to play super fast. He plays in an offense with Cliff that is going to someone's going to need to catch the passes 6 yards away from the line of scrimmage. And I mean, I could see an argument for taking him over maybe even up to Keon Coleman. No, obviously I don't think you'd have to. That's just not the way, it's not the way it works. But tight end premium leagues is like, it's very similar to the Knicks thing. It's like, what do you win when you win? Yeah. I mean, if you had taken Trey McBride and Cole Kmet and Pat Freiermuth and at the 208 and like your last 4 drafts, like you're laughing to the bank at tight end, in these leagues. And once a tight end is good, go try and trade for Trey McBride in a league right now. Right, you're getting people are just rejecting you and not even sending counters.
Yeah. I kind of felt that way about a lot of the tight ends in this class. Like I didn't think the tight end, and that's mostly in like 2 tight end, like we're in a 2 tight end league together in the Insiders League. And then there's, tight end premium leagues and stuff. But like, I found that even like Eric All or Theo Johnson, just these dart throws
are not getting drafted for like, I don't know, Spencer Rattler or whatever.
Yeah, right. Like to me, it just didn't seem right. It seemed like the market didn't really fully adjust to that. Are you drafting Ben Sinnott in underdog drafts too? Are you, because his price tag there is tight end 17 right now. It's pretty tough to get there.
I would never take him without Jaden Daniels right now is where it's at. Now when everyone like stops losing their minds a little bit and he goes back to like the tight end 22. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think after Hunter Henry, the whole position dies. Like I'm not a Juwan Johnson guy and it gets pretty flat. So like whatever. But I mean, you got to take him over like real wide receivers now.
I know
you got to take him over like real players who project to score. Like I promise you one thing: if you're a big Ben Sinnott bull, and I am, but I mean, like week 1 of the season, that dude's playing 17 snaps, running 10 routes, and Zach Ertz is going to get 5 catches. Yeah, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's the other thing too is that Ertz is still there. I'm not saying that he's better. I mean, I think that he's
$5 million guaranteed.
Yeah, right. Like I think that Ertz is likely pretty dusty at this point. But
he for sure is.
That's something that he's got to compete with. Jahan Dotson, you mentioned, horrible secondary metrics throughout his first 2 years in the league. I mean, he has not been nearly as good as what a lot of people, like I didn't mind him coming out, but a lot of people sort of pegged him to be. And so, but what if Jahan Dotson's just been sort of the result of some crappy circumstances there in Washington, right?
Yeah.
Possible. What if Luke McCaffrey I think Luke McCaffrey could be a great slot. I don't think his ceiling is like massively high, but I think he could be a solid enough slot. So there is some downside, but like you said, like realistically, he could be the number 2 option, in that offense behind McLaurin pretty quickly.
Yeah, by like week 9.
Yeah, it's not that tough of a depth chart to climb. In those rookie drafts, who were some of your late round dart throws?
Super late round. Rasheen Ali from the Marshall Thundering Herd to the Baltimore Ravens. Let me pull up some of my leagues. All the tight ends, right? So like Eric All, Tanner McLaughlin, Jared Wiley, Theo Johnson, all of those guys I think are pretty interesting. I actually did on tanking teams. I just made fun of him, but Spencer Rattler, I mean, like on any team I had that was bad, I took Spencer Rattler because you just want to be able to have like anyone who's drawing live to start at quarterback. Sure. He's not late round anymore. Vidal was at the start of the season, of rookie draft season. Lauby is I think pretty strong. Yeah. And Brendan Rice, super interesting because I don't think he's that good of a prospect, but
right. I agree.
They spent a pick on him with this pretty talentless roster.
Yeah.
And I saw someone make this point about Rice, and I thought this makes perfect sense, which is a wide receiver who doesn't play special teams, which is literally Brendan Rice. I mean, he's not even going to return.
Yeah.
You only take him if you think there's a chance he could be your third wide receiver. Because basically, if you're not a top 3 wide receiver, you have to play specials. And so being Justin Herbert's third wide receiver when all the other wide receivers stink is like maybe a pretty good job.
Yeah, I didn't like Rice either as a prospect, which is unfortunate because obviously he's the son of the greatest wide receiver or one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. But yeah, I mean, I think that he makes sense as at least a dart throw. And I don't even think that he's like a horrible final round pick in a Justin Herbert stack right now over on Underdog. Like there are worse final round picks that you can make. But the Rasheen Ali thing, I want to go back to that. I talked about him as a guy who I was drafting him and Anais Smith a good bit, in the final rounds of drafts. Smith, just someone who's kind of like that Curtis Samuel type prospect.
He's good too, and he's an older prospect, so I think there's like a better chance of him just getting on the field right away.
Yeah, and look, they have a need where they could throw him in the slot if they want to. And with Devontae Parker being out, he's not at all the same kind of player as Anais Smith, but if Parker were healthy, maybe he would have been playing on the boundary a little bit, and then they throw Devontae Smith into the slot a little bit more than he's seen and where he's played throughout his career so far. But now, without that like relatively safer boundary receiver, not that Parker's like amazing, but without that player, maybe Anais Smith does get into the slot a little bit more. But Rasheen Ali, man, it's so strange to me that people really weren't on and haven't really been on him. I mean, you have Keaton Mitchell, who's coming off a disastrous knee injury. You have Derrick Henry, who's 30 years old and, is showing some signs of breaking down, right? And you have Derrick Henry who might only be there for a year. And Rasheen Ali, with the stuff that I look at, I know that he went to a smaller program, and so numbers are inflated a little bit, but that's usually reflected in draft capital. He had really good marks throughout. Like, he was a good pass catcher. He's got some juice. Like, I think that he's someone that everyone, if he's on your dynasty waiver wire right now, he's someone that everyone should be stashing because he's really like, would we be shocked if he's the number 2 running back to start the season for Baltimore? Like, Justice Hill is fine, but like,
Justice Hill is what he is. Like, they're not gonna he's like passing downs, like safety blanket.
Right, exactly. Like, I don't think that it would be that shocking because I don't think Keaton Mitchell is gonna be ready to go. So, I think that Ali has made a lot of sense. In those final rounds. I'm going to do something a little bit different with the episode today compared to other Perspectives episodes. I want to just pick your brain about a couple of tweets that you'd sent, a couple controversial ones. Were they clickbait? Would you say they were clickbait, Davis?
It's always click. I'm always trying to get the clicks and the bait. I'm trying to churn the waters. If you see me tweet, just know that what I was thinking before that tweet was, how can I get the people going?
Yeah, I believe you said that you would have 0% exposure to any of these players, and then you said that you want all of the other players that we'll be talking through. But I picked out most of them, I'd say like 75% of them from those 2 lists. So basically guys that you're avoiding and guys that you're targeting right now in best ball drafts. And I thought some of the names were kind of interesting. I agree with some, disagree with some. One of them I even texted you about, and we were going back and forth with a little bit, so we'll talk about that. But let's start with the first guy, and we can kind of double dip here because you had Brandon Aiyuk on your 0% exposure list, which I guarantee you're going to draft Brandon Aiyuk at some point if you haven't already.
I still haven't. I mean, I'm about 80 drafts in on Underdog, and I still have not. That's
impressive. That's impressive. And then you had Debo, though, on the opposite list of guys that you're targeting. So talk to me about why you're doing this when there is a gap in ADP, but it's not like massively dramatic between Aiyuk and Debo. It's really like, where are you positioned in your best ball draft right now? If you're a middle round positioning, middle of the round positioning, then you'll have a chance to get Aiyuk. If you're sort of, at the front end of those drafts, then you can get Debo. But why are you in on Debo and out on Aiyuk?
Well, I take Adams over Aiyuk, which is why I'll never get him. So because there's never really a situation where no one else shares that opinion with me. So I'm just able to take as much Adams as I want. And I think the summary for why Aiyuk instead of Debo is very simple, which is no player really is ever going to have a better ceiling projection in a given week. I mean, Tyreek Hill, I guess, would have a better ceiling projection, but we're talking about a guy, 2021, 14 touchdowns on 136 touches, 12 touchdowns last season on 97 touches after a very down year for him in 2022 where he was injured. Debo gets let's just be honest about it. fake plays. Kyle Shanahan draws up fake cheating plays for him to score touchdowns. Sure. Brandon Aiyuk doesn't get. Well, I mean, how many points do you think Debo adds every year on literal fake Kyle Shanahan nonsense? Probably 50 points a year on dumb stuff. Yeah. Aiyuk doesn't get that. Aiyuk has to win down the field. That's how he gets his points. I'm not saying Aiyuk is this terrible player and, oh my God, I can't believe you fish are drafting Brandon Aiyuk. But one thing I'm just consciously trying to do is be less of a, percentage edge. Like, I'm trying to take more real stands to create leverage for my portfolio relative to the field, because Brian Hooper did this analysis of all the drafters in the field last year in Best Ball Mania 4, and I was like one of the top 150 most nitty players in the whole pool in terms of drafting guys close to ADP.
Yeah.
So I'm consciously trying to change that. Although, just for whatever it's worth, the way the prizes work this year, you're actually going to be rewarded greater for drafting nittier and just advancing more teams.
Yeah.
And if I got to handpick guys to have in week 17, I mean, Debo might be in the top 5 guys I'd want, just because he can just score 3 touchdowns on 6 touches. It's just what he does.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially if you like the competition in terms of who you would be picking, like the opportunity cost, around Aiyuk. If you like Devontae Adams more than Aiyuk, I've been splitting mostly. I've just kind of not taken a stand.
I think that's fine too
at that area. And obviously, the game environment in Week 17 for San Francisco is just really attractive.
Really good.
Detroit.
So, I mean, it also is for the Raiders too.
I don't mind that game either. But yeah, I mean, if you look at their numbers too, Aiyuk last season was unbelievable, and I do have a little bit of fear that he's not going to be, if I look at my projections right now, I think he's projected at wide receiver 14, wide receiver 15 or something like that. And I do worry a little bit about just natural regression hitting a little bit. He had a yards per route run last year over 3, which is just
who's more likely to regress? The guy who gets all the stuff close to the line of scrimmage and it's on Yak versus the guy who gets deep targets from Brock Purdy. I mean, both can regress, and we've seen the regression with Debo. So both can, but I think it's more likely Aiyuk does. Yeah, and I think that, look, to me, San Francisco is just an offense that I'm not going to be upset in investing in. I know I'm not going to be upset. They're going to regress probably from a touchdown standpoint because they had so many offensive touchdowns last year, and we see that number fall back year over year. So maybe they won't have as many, but I thought that was going to happen this past year too, and it didn't happen. And so the environment for them is really good. The contingent upside for them is really good. I think I wasn't shocked that you liked Debo, because I think anyone in San Francisco makes sense. I think it was more shocking to see Aiyuk on the list of avoids. But again, I think the crux of the argument seems to be you taking more of a stand on a guy like Devontae Adams, as opposed to you just being hey, there's something glaringly wrong with Brandon Aiyuk. Yeah, there's nothing wrong. I just I think Adams actually has some sneaky outs of not being a Raider too, of it's 25 million dead cap, but it's the Raiders, so who cares? If he just wakes up and says I don't want to be here, it's the Raiders. The 25 million dead cap, what is that when you're a dead team anyway?
Yeah, right. Another guy on that list who's a second rounder was Saquon Barkley. So talk to me about Saquon. Is this a tush push fade for you?
Yeah, this is just it's Barkley. Well, actually, it's not just that. It's first that, but Barkley's best production as a fantasy player has been catching passes and adding yards after the catch and stuff. And the Eagles are a low volume offense, relatively speaking anyways. They just don't have a lot of plays because they run the ball so successfully, so the clock shortens. And Jalen Hurts doesn't really throw to his running backs. It's not that he doesn't throw at all. So if Saquon Barkley, I don't know, let's say DeAndre Swift was actually still on the Eagles and he was a 6th round pick or whatever, I might still be interested in running that experience back just because it was fine enough.
Yeah.
And Swift really ran bad on the touchdowns. I think he didn't score one for 9 weeks in a row or something like that. Kind of crazy. But Barkley is in a situation where he's no longer the only offensive weapon on his team. If you wanted to be kind to him, you'd say he's the 2nd best weapon on the team behind A.J. Brown. If you wanted to be rude, you'd say he's the 4th behind Hurts and Devonta Smith. Yeah. But really, it's just for Barkley to get there, he's going to have to score a bunch of touchdowns from 20 yards or more, because I don't care if Jason Kelce retired. Jalen Hurts is the success rate on the tush. They went 48 of 50 on the tush push. It is you cannot do anything to stop it, regardless of who the center is. They're not going to replace that play.
Yeah, I think with my fear with a total fade on Barkley, and again, I'm not saying that you're going to totally fade every single one of these guys, especially as you get into like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drafts. But my one fear with a total fade of Barkley is, number one, we could obviously see, in an individual game, I think that Saquon still hypothetically has just as high of upside as anyone else, right? That's one thing. He actually doesn't look that bad in my projections too, while accounting obviously for Jalen Hurts doing his thing. I do think though that like when you think about like, with projections, you're looking at median outcomes, right? And you want to think about like, okay, where could this really rise and where could this really fall? I don't think that there's a lot of a big range with his projection, right? Like I don't think there's like an area where all of a sudden he's just going to be massively good. Because I don't think the Jalen Hurts stuff is just going to go away. And then, I do think that he probably has a decent floor, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for, in our best ball draft. So I've drafted him. I like getting Eagles mega stacks at times whenever I'm in the back half of the first round, but I can definitely understand being lower on Saquon this year. One player that you're lower on and that I've been talking about being lower on for weeks now is Josh Jacobs. So talk to me about Jacobs and why you're fading him.
I mean, Josh Jacobs' best skill set he's offered for an NFL team is basically like the Kyren Williams skill set of like, you just don't got to take me off the field. I can play 90% of the snaps. I can pass block. I'm a fine goal line rusher. I'm a fine third down back. I'm kind of just fine at all of these things. And Matt LaFleur has just never done that ever. Yeah. Like go look through every Packers team. I mean, it's like we all are forced to watch AJ Dillon. And we're like, God, this stinks. And like Matt LaFleur is like, yeah, AJ Dillon, boy, he really stinks. And then he gives him 40% of the snaps the next week. Like it's nuts. They just are philosophically committed to like a 60-40 split. And Marshawn Lloyd was a 60-40 split guy in college. Like he's like, he won't even have to do anything different than what he just did for USC. He'll just come in and get 8 carries and 2 catches and be on his way.
It seems weird to me that people just seem to be completely ignoring Marshawn Lloyd. I feel like people are just assuming that Josh Jacobs, and look, obviously anything's possible, so this might end up coming to fruition. But Marshawn Lloyd, pretty good prospect, not like an amazing prospect, but at the very least, a very good change of pace back. Like that is why you want him on your NFL team. And how does that not fit perfectly with what the Packers kind of need and do alongside Josh Jacobs? And so my you're talking about Matt LaFleur, and what LaFleur has done historically. Go back to Tennessee. He was the offensive coordinator when they were giving Dion Lewis over Derrick freaking Henry.
People do literally forget Matt LaFleur gave Dion Lewis 250 touches a year. Derrick Henry was on his same team.
Yeah, it's crazy that I just don't think that we should be ignoring what we've seen from LaFleur, what their actual actions have been. Yeah, they paid Jacobs. They signed him this offseason. They wanted him on their team, but they also lost Aaron Jones. And they wanted a switch up from Jones. I think also like people are just kind of like looking at what Aaron Jones did and they're using that to justify Josh Jacobs' fantasy performance. I think Aaron Jones is a better running back than Josh Jacobs. Like Aaron Jones is one of the best receiving running backs in all of football. And to assume that Josh Jacobs can step in, who has had plenty of question marks as a receiver throughout his career in terms of like high volume stuff, 15+% target shares. Like we haven't seen that from him super consistently. And so I think there's just a lot of red flags with Jacobs where he's going. And it's just weird to me that he's going, he's fallen in best ball drafts recently, but it's still strange to me that he's been going fairly significantly ahead of some of like the other, like a round or 2 rounds later, you can get guys who project similarly, even if you don't like those guys. One of those guys being another guy that you're fading, Rachaad White. This is one that I do disagree with. I think that this year's Rachaad White might be Rachaad White.
Rachaad White.
The way that people are sort of talking about him and analyzing him, it's almost like a copy paste of what we said last year with Rachaad White, except now we have a season where from a points per game perspective, he was top 10 in football and he got off to a slower start. Obviously touchdowns really helped him down the stretch, but to me, he's someone who projects very, very well. And I understand that those projections can go south, and I'm not someone who only drafts off projections. In fact, I do the opposite. But, White is someone who has shown that he can be a player who, like you said, like we saw with Kyron Williams last year and what we've seen with Josh Jacobs, just a dude on the field consistently. And if there's anything that is good about his profile, it is pass catching. Like his ground game work is pretty putrid, but if you look at his ground game work compared to other Tampa Bay running backs that we've seen over the last couple of years since Rachaad White entered the league, he was just as good as Leonard Fournette year one, which I know is not saying much, but I'm just saying it's not like he was, it's not like White was egregiously
He's not bad at it.
Yeah, right. And then last year, he was better than the alternatives in that offense, which again, I understand it's like Chase Edmonds and Keyshawn Vaughn. They're not good running backs, but I don't think that he's necessarily, I don't think we can just conclude that he's a horrible, horrible running back on the ground, because a lot of those metrics that people look at are very team dependent, right? It matters what's going on in front of you when you're a running back. And then at the very least, he has his pass catching profile. So my question to you with Rachaad White, obviously, why are you fading him? Why don't you like him? But then I think the wild card to many is Bucky Irving. And is Bucky Irving playing a role in why you're afraid of White?
I mean, Bucky Irving is not playing a role in the sense of like, oh, Bucky Irving, I'm so scared of Bucky Irving. Like, he's this great player. It's just that they tried Chase Edmonds. They tried Sean Tucker. Like, they were just throwing crap at a wall last year, and none of it stuck because those guys were terrible. My primary concern, though, is mostly Canales related, where Baker was awful. Then he gets Canales and he's good. How much of Rachaad White playing 85% of the snaps was a Canales thing? Like, if you just go back and look at when he's called plays, that's kind of what he's preferred. And if I actually kind of feel similar to Rachaad as I do about Kyron with like the Blake Corum and the foot. And it's like, if I'm hitting this uncertain situation where I got to make a bet one way or the other, and it's not particularly clear who's going to be right at the moment, I want to at least feel good I'm betting on a guy who I think is like pretty talented.
Sure.
And I think White is a good pass catcher at the NFL level. I think he's like a bad rusher. Likely like one of the worst guys who's going to get as many carries as he will. I structurally, I mean, I definitely like Pacheco more than him. They've separated a little bit in ADP. They were closer before, but structurally, I prefer to take Terry McLaurin. I prefer to take Xavier Worthy. I prefer to take Mark Andrews. I prefer to take Trey McBride. Not really Kincaid. Like, just normally, my preferred structure is one running back through 5 rounds. Not 2. And very rarely is he going to be the first one.
Yeah, I've realized that more and more after giving some advice about White a couple weeks ago, where I was like, oh yeah, like from a projections versus where he gets drafted standpoint, he looks like somewhat of a value. But the more I've drafted and experienced it, and just seen where his ADP falls and such, yeah, I agree. I mean, look, I'm taking Andrews over him in best ball. I'm taking McBride ahead of him in best ball. I think that a lot of the wide receivers there are at least intriguing from like a stacking standpoint, where like, you can throw a dart at Jaden Reed if you want to, or you can throw a dart at Terry McLaurin, or you can throw a dart at, if you did get Mahomes in round 4 and you can somehow get Xavier Worthy as well, you can go that route more. There's a lot of stacking potential. So because of that, I've just not had as much Rachaad White as I thought I was going to have. But I do think, going back to him as a player, I would say he's probably a below average rusher. I would agree. The thing that I don't agree with, not from you, but just what I've seen with White, is Bucky Irving being a better pass catcher than Rachaad White. If you look at Irving's profile coming out compared to White's, people forget how good Rachaad White was as a pass catcher, as a prospect. Like, that was like the thing that got me. That's part of the reason he was comped for me to David Johnson, where he actually had decent explosion from a testing standpoint. Rachaad White did. And then the size matched up a lot with David Johnson. And then it was the receiving profile that matched up really closely to David Johnson. We haven't seen the explosion, I don't think, just visually in the NFL with Rachaad White. But I do think that he's a better player and prospect than what we're getting with Bucky Irving. It could be a situation though where Irving just hurts, which I think is probable. Irving just hurts Rachaad White more than Irving has standalone value in fantasy. Right?
That's almost certainly to be what it is, where it's just like the mere existence of him playing 30% of the snaps on an offense that I think will probably just be a little bit less efficient because Dave Canales seems like he's really good at his job.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. That's mostly where my fear is.
Let's go to Alvin Kamara. He's very difficult for me because, again, when you look at just projections, I like to at least start.
He's going to project good. I promise you, he's going to project.
I mean,
good.
He's going to project like top 10 good, right? Like realistically, and he goes in that like mid RB2 range to late RB2 range, and it's just really difficult for me because I look at the projection, I'm like, oh my God, this is an obvious value. But then I look at like historical trends and age-related stuff, and it all looks bad for Kamara. But you're taking a stronger stand. I'm very much in the middle. I'm at market with Kamara. You're taking a stand where you're seemingly not drafting him. Why is that?
Well, you can just get elder pass-catching running back who gets a good Week 17 dome game, and Aaron Jones, the pick right after him, and I prefer that. I prefer to take J.J. McCarthy to Derek Carr. So it's like doubled up the reason why that's good. I also prefer the Packers on the board after there for a Week 17 correlation to like, they're just like all the contextual stuff goes to Aaron Jones. Here's some Alvin Kamara games from 2023. This is when he's 28, not 29. 3 receptions for -11 yards in a 28-6 win against Carolina. That's one of my favorite. 9 rushes for 19 yards and a loss to the Los Angeles Rams. 14 rushes for 50. Like, you guys get the picture.
Yeah,
he's a 29-year-old running back who really was always a good explosive rusher, but he was never the poster boy for success rate, right? He would have a lot of negative plays, which used to work when he was fast and strong and young, and probably is not going to work so good when he's 29. Now, could Alvin Kamara literally catch 100 passes? Do I see a scenario where that happens in this year? Literally, yes. It's totally possible that you get buried that way. But if Alvin Kamara buries me that way, I'll live to see another day.
I'm a little intrigued, too, by Clint Kubiak being there. I think that could be
totally
an interesting wrinkle in how they use him and et cetera. But it could also go south. It could also just be, I really like Kendre Miller and I want to change things up in this backfield. So yeah, I mean, I'm at market, but it sounds like, there's plenty of reason to, be a little bit lower on him.
I mean, both like Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren. Even like David Montgomery. Like David Montgomery could just score like 16 touchdowns. Like he could have the Gus Edwards
contingent upside too.
Last year.
Yeah, I mean, like Jahmyr Gibbs gets hurt. David Montgomery's an RB1, so yeah, understand that too. Najee Harris. I was a little surprised to see Najee here. Not that I think that he's an unbelievable player, but I think that Karain on Becoming a Best Ball Bro talked about Jalen Warren being arguably his highest rostered player this year. But look, it's the Arthur Smith offense, run heavy offense. Tell me why you're not into Najee. Is this just like a spillover from last year? After,
I mean, part of it is definitely ideological. The other part of it is that if he's going right there next to his teammate, who I think is better. Like, also, we are now to the stage of Najee's career, the same place we got with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, where it's just like, all right, enough already. Like, we don't care that you were a first-round pick. Like, if you're just really bad, we're just, like, straight up not going to play you. So, like, Najee Harris going to, like, 23% of the snaps. I mean, I'm not saying it's probable, but it's definitely they turned down his 5th-year contract option. Like, it's pretty clear he's not going to be on the team at any, like, high salary moving forward. And I think the issue with Najee is I see no upside. I see no way he really buries me in this offense. Like, quarterback play is going to be bad. Volume's going to be low. How many touchdowns are going to be available for the 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers? And like maybe I'll end up being wrong and Jalen Warren is just like a total scat back and he averages 9.7 underdog points per game. Like that's possible too. But I just think Najee like kind of stinks, is not explosive, doesn't have, and like, I love this range for running backs. I like Tony Pollard. I like Ramondre Stevenson. I like David Montgomery. I like Brian Robinson Jr., like kind of like running back 22 to 39, where Corum goes. Like that's the range I want to be living in. And if there's a bunch of other guys I like there, then why take a guy that I just don't like and don't really believe in?
Yeah. I mean, part of it for me is I think there's enough. Number one, there's obviously, again, going back to the contingent upside, Jaylen Warren gets hurt. Najee Harris going to see a lot of volume more than likely in that offense. Yeah. And, in a given game, that can be beneficial. For what it's worth, Atlanta over the 3 years with Arthur Smith, and two of them, look, it was Cordero Patterson in one, so he's a pass catcher, Bijan Robinson, a pass catcher, so we have to take this with a grain of salt, but they were top 3 in running back target share in 2 of those 3 seasons, so I think that's at least a little bit interesting. There's not a ton of competition in Pittsburgh's offense either, but I do think that it favors, a lot of that favors Jaylen Warren more than it does Najee Harris. Like, I'm going to have more Jaylen Warren at his because he does go a little bit later usually. It flip-flops depending on.
And to be honest, you know what I should say? Jacob Sanderson, after I posted that, sent me a tweet that he got Najee Harris at, I think, pick 102 in a Best Ball Mania. Like, sure, yes, I'll take Nick Chubb. I took Nick Chubb at pick 130 in a draft the other day. Like, if you just give me insane, outrageous stuff like that, like, yeah, I'm not gonna fight it.
Yeah, you're going to see that. Najee's one guy that happens, and obviously the injured guys, like you talked about Nick Chubb and TJ Hawkinson, it happens for too, where like Hawkins is probably not going to play or at least give you anything usable until like week 12 next year. But he'll sometimes fall past like 150, like into like to a range where the opportunity cost just isn't super significant. And I had no intention of getting like a Hawk or a Chubb, but every once in a while when they fall, it's like, yeah, whatever. 2 more guys that you're fading. These are lower tiered ones. Jerry Jeudy, talk to me about him.
Jerry Judy's not going to kill me. There's no multiverse that exists where Jerry Jeudy, puts it all together in year 6, year 5.
Yeah, year 5.
Year 5, in a bad outdoor weather, playing with a wide receiver who's way better than him, probably a tight end who's way better than him, and maybe a slot wide receiver, honestly. Elijah Moore might be better than Jerry Jeudy. Like, it's pretty close between who's been more disappointing between those two. The offense is going to be super run. It's just like, sure, could I draft 4% Jerry Jeudy and maybe he gets 14 points in a week to advance me? But like, I got Dontavian Wicks ranked ahead of him, and I think Dontavian Wicks could win me multiple weeks. I think Dontavian Wicks could score 250 PPR points. I think he's a really good player. So I'm just out. I'm out.
Well, let's just touch on Wicks because he's one of your targets right now, or the guys that you're drafting a lot of. I'm in the same boat, and I want to ask you. I've talked about Wicks. I've talked about his, yards per route run in year 1 being above 2, and players who have done that historically have given us really good output in year 2 and beyond. Obviously he doesn't have the same prospect profile as a lot of those guys because I'm talking like Justin Jefferson, March.
But I liked him as a prospect. He played on this. We played on this horrible team. So he played for the Virginia Cavaliers, which, like, if you've watched any college football, I mean, like, these dudes, like, they stink. And his junior season, he got hurt his final season, but his junior season for this awful team that won 6 games, he like led them in yards by like 400 yards over every other player on the team, led the team in touchdowns. He I think was just kind of in a horrible situation in college.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the overall sentiment around Dontavian Wicks entering the NFL was not this, right? Like not even close. Not what he did year 1. And the guys who did what he did in year 1 from a yards per out run standpoint, now Nakua is also kind of an outlier, but you have players, I'm talking like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham, like literally the best of the best prospects that we've seen coming out are the ones who are part of that list. So obviously those players are going to have higher hit rates in year 2 and beyond, beyond just looking at yards per route run. But Dontavian Wicks looks on paper like a very, very insane value. And I've talked about this at this point. People are probably sick of it because I've been bringing him up for the last 2 months on the show. My question to you, though, with Wicks, is his ADP going to rise? Like, it feels like everyone's talking about Wicks.
Rise?
Yeah, like why is his ADP still where it's at? And do you think it's going to, it has to eventually go up by at least a couple of rounds, right?
Yeah. I think the answer is one is it's pretty, the Wick stuff is pretty insular to like super virgins who are doing this. And then the other thing is, look, our friends over at establishtheRun.com are massive market drivers for this stuff. And I can pull up the rankings, but it when they move, Tyler Lockett is really high in their ranks. So you can tell when you're in a draft with an ETR guy when Tyler Lockett goes to pick 90 or whatever.
Yeah.
So if he's not that high in the default rankings on ETR or on your stuff or on Karain stuff or wherever, that is definitely one part of it. Like because it's hard from a projections perspective to get the Packers wide receivers to make sense because there's 4 guys who all play and 2 tight ends. And like you might be giving a little bit to Bo Melton, who actually closed out the season pretty good as well. Like, so you just got the only ADP that doesn't make very much sense for the Packers guys is Reed, where like Reed's too high. Dobbs, Wicks, and Reed should probably all be much closer together.
I agree. The reason why I still get some Jaden Reed is because there are times where at that point in the draft, some of the other wide receivers, it's like, okay, am I going to like reach on a Keon Coleman or a Ladd or something like that? Or am I, because there are some builds where I go like I need to get a wide receiver. Like it's just,
I don't want to have none of Jaden Reed because like clearly he's a baller.
But I agree that like the from a value standpoint, Wicks greater than Reed, especially. I think that what we're likely to see too is a rotation. I think that if you're betting on let me ask you this, if you're betting on one of the Green Bay wide receivers, agnostic of where they're getting drafted, which wide receiver would you bet on as being like a good, like potentially elite player in the league?
Potentially elite, I would actually say Reed because he's got the kind of ineffable qualities of like
totally agree.
He just is like very athletic. He just is like a great player.
Yeah.
Wicks, I think I need to squint more to see it. The thing that everyone already says is that LaFleur has been comparing him to Devontae Adams in terms of like the route running and the. Sure. I mean, that's not my game. That'd be a better question to ask like Matt Harmon. Yeah. But for my, I did want to mention one thing is the yards per route run stuff can be kind of fake on guys like Wicks because the Packers run that rotation. So it's like Tyreek Hill last year had like, what was it, like a 4.5 yards per route run. It's like the greatest of all time. But like he only runs like 27 routes a game because he just like runs a route and then goes and sits on the sideline and tags Cedric Wilson in when he's not going to get the ball. So something to note for that.
Well, also, I'm pretty sure Bo Melton's yards per route run was really, really high. And then Jaden Reed was also that over that 2.0 mark. So like, yeah, there's definitely some team circumstances going on here where it's not just the wide receiver. But you mentioned Harmon. Harmon charted Wicks, and it looked really, really good. But he also charted Jaden Reed, and it looked really, really good. So
I would expect them all to look good because Jordan Love just like ran out of his mind with efficiency last season. So they should all look good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Reed and Wicks, like I think Reed is the guy that could. Because, like, he comped for me to Stephon Diggs coming out. Like, I thought that he could be that impactful of a player. He's a little bit, like, he has more of, like, I don't want to say this as in, like, I think this is him, but, like, that Debo upside of, like, getting more end arounds and getting some stuff closer to the line of scrimmage.
The fake Shanahan plays.
Yeah, exactly.
Reed's getting the fake Shanahan plays in this offense.
Right. And so that's why I think that he definitely deserves to be the wide receiver one from an ADP perspective, Jaden Reed, because I think that the ceiling is by far the best, to be the most consistent piece in that rotation, to be the guy that they hypothetically might not take off the field, whereas they take off Christian Watson so he can save his hammies, and maybe Romeo Doubs a little bit too, who they seem to just like, and he had a good playoff too. But that's sort of the way that I'm looking at the Packers wideouts. The last one that you're on your fades list is Darnell Mooney. Is this I just like other guys there? Is this he's dusty? And then if you have a Falcon stack, are you just only going after Pitts and London and just ignoring maybe
Rondale,
Bijan too? Rondale would be your pick over Mooney?
Because I mean, everyone gets to have their biases, right? If you see things through my bias, Rondale never really got a fair chance in Arizona. He's going to an offensive coordinator who's been with the Rams, who just found a full-time role for Tutu Atwell, who's maybe the only player in the NFL who's smaller than Rondale Moore. I think Mooney is like such a dog to get targets that matter in this offense, where it's like, again, what's the point? I particularly after like pick 140, either I'm like papering over holes at quarterback and tight end because I'm way behind the 8 ball, or I really would like to be taking guys who I think are real difference makers.
Yeah. The other thing too is that I don't think people realize how bad Darnell Mooney was last year from like a yards per route run standpoint. He was under 1 yards per route run. And I actually ran a query and I looked at which players in since 2011 past year 3 in the NFL. So we're talking about like, these like more veterans, guys who are kind of past the early stages of their career, past year 3 had a yards per route run below 1 while running 200 or more routes. So they had a poor yards per route run rate. They're veterans in the league. And I was just looking to see like how many of them actually bounced back and just had a good season later on in their career. The answer, you don't have, you literally, the best outcome was John Brown one year having a wide receiver, like a low end wide receiver 2 season. Otherwise you get guys like Kenny Britt, who had a decent enough season once. The other Steve Smith, the Eagles, Steve Smith, Cole Beasley was one. Like you're just not getting really these like high upside players. I think you're right that at the end of the day, I might have some Mooney and Stacks, but that's the extent that I'm gonna go after him. I don't think he's gonna have that much standalone value. Let's look at some guys that you're targeting heavily. We talked about some. Jalen Waddle was one that you brought up. I love this call. Feels weird that his ADP dropped pretty significantly, or you can get him. He's rising
better last year than he was the year before.
Yeah, exactly. So talk about that. Talk about why you're into Waddle.
Yards per route run, higher. Targets per route run, higher. He ran bad on touchdowns, and it felt like he got injured every game. Like every game he would come in and he'd like roll his ankle or like land weird, get the wind knocked out. And maybe you could argue a guy who broke his leg in college and, I don't know, maybe he's too small, maybe he's too soft. I would probably bet against that stuff, especially because he kept getting injured in these games and then coming back in. He ran more routes per game than Tyreek Hill. So you're talking about a guy who led the most efficient passing offense in the NFL, higher yards per pass play than the 49ers and the Chiefs. He leads that offense in routes. That's just a really good bet to make, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing with Miami, have you experienced yourself just drafting, like getting a lot of Miami stacks just naturally, just given the way that ADP sort of sits? Like I get a Tyreek Hill, where he goes, let's say I get him at 104.
Oh, I got a scorching hot take you're not ready for.
And then, okay, I'm ready to hear it. But I go Tyreek Hill, and then I'll get Jalen Waddle in the second. I have no problem getting him late second. I think that's where he should be drafted. And then, you can get Devon Achane too. You could just get the Miami stack in your first 3 rounds and then get Tua late and you're set. The issue, and you can even get Amari Cooper for that week 17 correlation in round 4, and all of a sudden the first 4 picks of your draft just correlate really strongly to that game. Now, obviously it's not necessarily going to be, we don't know, but it might not be the most attractive game in the world, but it's a team that's fairly easy to stack when you're in certain positions in your draft. Obviously, if you're in the latter parts of the first round, you're not going to have a Miami stack, but what's your scorching hot take about Miami stacking?
Okay, well, the first is that I really don't want to take Tua playing in the cold weather game in December. Obviously I'm fine
that's fair.
Taking Waddle and Achane and Mostert and stuff. So I prefer. I have one quarterback a lot of the time by then, but I like, if I'm kind of in jail, I like to do like Evan Ingram and Trevor Lawrence or Jameson Williams and Jared Goff or Kyler Murray and whatever. But the other scorching take is, as of right now, and there's no way I can do this for the entire summer and get away with it, but right now I'm just taking Justin Jefferson 3rd overall. I'm taking him. So I'm taking Justin Jefferson over Tyreek and over Chase and over St. Brown, who that's starting to flip. So that's like a portfolio-based decision. Well, it's not really, because I think Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the NFL. He gets 10, 11 dome games, one of the two. And JJ McCarthy's like fine, maybe he's even really good, but I know that Justin Jefferson would smash with Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins had 480 passing yards in a game last season, I think 415. Just throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson. He's just that guy. Like he was the number 1 pick last year.
Right. I'm interested. I haven't researched it for whatever reason, but I've done a lot of research on pass catchers with rookie quarterbacks and it not being like a good thing for the pass catchers. But I am curious when you sort of filter that out and look at only like early round wide receivers or like top half. Like, has there been an instance, I can't think of any off the top of my head, where you have a rookie quarterback with a top 5, top 6, even first round wide receiver? So I'd have to dig into it to see if there's like anything that we've seen historically to make us feel better or worse about Justin Jefferson. Isaiah Pacheco is one. I did a study earlier this week, Davis, where I looked at prospect scores and how those prospect scores might affect how we draft and redraft in these running backs. And what I found was, and this scares me because I still am relatively into Isaiah Pacheco, but it's kind of crazy how bad the hit rates are for top 24 running backs who had bad prospect scores.
Because they can get replaced for any reason.
Right, regardless of their age. Like whether they're late in their careers, earlier in their careers, whatever. I didn't look at age. That wasn't one of the layers of this. And so it does scare me a little bit about Pacheco, scared me a little bit about Kyron Williams. What do you see with Pacheco? Because look, I agree. Like I on paper, Pacheco seems like a value right now, especially when he falls into like the 5th. I mean, it just seems like a very obvious pick, but what are you seeing with him?
I guess what I'm seeing is that the team literally, what did they invest at the running back position this offseason? $1.1 million guaranteed dollars to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Not even a 7th round pick. Only undrafted free agents. Amani Bailey, Deneric Prince from last season. He's on a reserve futures contract, and Carson Steele. So it's either Isaiah Pacheco is in the same role we literally just saw him in, or Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the best pick on the board. I mean, those are I guess those are your options. And to be honest, I'm fine middling those. I'm fine taking Pacheco at his ADP and taking Clyde with the literal 18th round sometimes too.
Yeah, well, the other thing too with Kansas City is last year, Pacheco was like a high-end RB2, mid-range RB2. Kansas City scored like 37 offensive touchdowns.
Yeah, like that's were bad.
That's just not going to happen again. I mean, if you look at the history of Patrick Mahomes in the NFL and what his offenses have done, they're usually over 50 touchdowns. And so I think that alone makes Isaiah Pacheco really attractive. Cooper Kupp is another one. Last year still almost had a 25% target share per game rate, despite, the way that people might view him. His yards per route run did drop to 1.86, but it's not like 1.86 is that bad of a yards per route run. Are you just looking at Kupp and saying, probably going to see a 25% target share in this offense, and he's going in round 4, so I'm just going to draft that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cooper Kupp is a case of we overreacted a bit too much to... I mean, I guess he wasn't very good in their playoff games. And maybe this will be a case where when the milk goes bad, it doesn't unspoil, which is kind of my thesis for a lot of players in general.
Yeah.
But just like with Kupp, like watching the Rams play, I wasn't watching Cooper Kupp being like, oh yeah, he's past it. He can't move anymore. Like he basically just looked like Cooper Kupp to me. He's a 4th round pick. Like how surprised would you be if Cooper Kupp scored more half PPR points than Nakua? You'd be surprised. Right. But you wouldn't be like, that's impossible. That would never happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of what happened last year, too, was like a lot of between the ears stuff with Kupp. Like, he wasn't necessarily like confident enough. He wasn't totally like that. Like, he made some mental errors that we've seen him be such a clean wide receiver historically. And last year, there were just some like weird drops and stuff like that, where even still, his numbers ended up being fine enough. I mean, there were definitely times where you were frustrated because, he didn't give you the production that you wanted out of him. But now he has the offseason, and hopefully there's not as much like turmoil to start this season as there was last year, with Kupp. Like that.
I mean, he came back from a hamstring injury and had 8 for 118 and 7 for 141, 7 for 148 and a touchdown his first 2 games back. Like,
right.
I don't think he's done and dusted. And so he's just got like one. I don't think he's like hardly ever a pick that kills you there, I guess, unless the hamstring goes again. Yeah. Now, I guess I will be very sensitive to it's August 3rd. Cooper Kupp is not practicing for a week with a hamstring. Then I'll be like, okay, all right, I need to not be too exposed to this.
I feel kind of similarly about Mark Andrews, where, last year is banged up. His numbers took a little bit, like his targets per route run did drop a little bit, but look at what Baltimore did offensively this offseason. Not a lot, right? Like they add Tez Walker, but I don't think that's going to be a significant piece of the offense. Obviously they add Derrick Henry, but I'm talking pass catchers. What do you like about Andrews? I mean,
they did what they said they were going to do in throwing the ball more. It was the first time Lamar ever got over 400 passing attempts. Andrews' ADOT went down a little bit, but he scored 6 touchdowns in 10 games. Lamar won the MVP. Like, he was an efficient passer. He didn't need to pass as much, but he was more efficient as the total attempts went up, which is like a legitimate concern about, like, you could have been like, are we sure Lamar can remain efficient at 500 passing attempts per season? And Odell Beckham's replaced by Devontae Walker. It's just like I get the guy who's been one of the best fantasy tight ends for the last 5 years at a discounted price because younger guys were better last year because like Sam Laporta was awesome. Like I might bet Mark Andrews straight up for more fantasy points than Laporta. Real Andrews can lead that team in targets. He can get more targets than Flowers.
Yeah, I think Laporta is just overdrafted right now in general. So because you can get McBride and Andrews where you're getting them. I agree. I think Andrews. The easiest way to think of Andrews is he's one of the tight ends that could break fantasy football. So
easily.
Sure. So get him. All right, I don't want to go through. We have a ton of names here. I want to give you one more to talk through. Antonio Gibson. Now, you mentioned Ramondre earlier that you were okay enough in getting him. I personally think that Ramondre is sort of in the Zamir White standard dead zone back. I think there's a chance that we just see fine enough production out of those guys. But again, going back to the prospect score study, they both fell below an 80 prospect score coming out, and now they're being drafted as RB2s. There's just a lot of historical evidence from like a market standpoint that points to these guys being overdrafted or play. You could get a Ramondre Stevenson production 4 rounds later. But is that part of the reason why you might lean on Antonio Gibson, or are you just going Gibson because you think he's a good player and you're just going to draft good players?
I think he's a good player. He's finally separated from a coaching staff that just like hated him for whatever. I mean, it's because he fumbled. They just hated the fumbles. Even last year, like all of his metrics were good. His success rate was fine. His rush yards over expectation was fine. His breakaway run percentage was high, although there's a question of like how much you want that out of a guy who doesn't get very many carries. Like it's probably not as valuable. He's he actually had 59 targets last season, like despite pretty much getting benched. And I think Drake May is good. I mean, that's going to be my difference versus the market on everyone else is I think Drake May is good. I think he's probably, I would have taken him at 2 if I was the Commanders. Not that my opinion really means that much. I think it's crazy to expect Jacoby Brissett to play like 8 games, which is kind of what the market is doing right now. Like Drake May's quarterback 29 on Underdog. People are just like terrified. Yeah. I don't know. It just doesn't really happen anymore.
Right.
Who's the last guy to sit? I guess Pickett sat 5 games.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's a proper take with May. And not only that, but May himself kind of has a little Josh Allen in him. There's a chance that May is a lot more mobile than, we saw it in college, but I'm just saying transferring to the NFL that, he at least has that kind of upside. Not Jaden Daniels fantasy upside, but like some upside if he does have that Josh Allen in him.
Yeah, 100%. I just think, that just kind of reverberates around to everyone else on the team of like, if the quarterback play is better, like we saw this with CJ Stroud last year, when the quarterback play is better than the market anticipates, everyone on the team is transformed. And Ramondre is like pretty much just a replacement level guy. Now there's no real third running back on the team, which is pretty helpful. Like there's not a guy you'd be worried about turning it into it. But worst case scenario, you're getting, a pretty useful passing down back, like not really that dissimilar from James White on this team for a decade or whatever. Upside scenario, you've got contingent value. Maybe he just comes in and really impresses the coaches and they don't hate him the way the Commanders coach hates him, and he's just awesome.
Let me ask you this. In a draft, I don't know exactly where their ADPs are, but would you be drafting Kamani Vidal over or after Antonio Gibson?
I guess that would be one I would middle. I definitely have Gibson ranked ahead because, his median projection is so much. Like Kamani Vidal's has a lot of zeros in his median. Sure. It's just the way it works. But there's no chance that week 1 Gibson gets 19 carries and leads the Patriots in rushing. Like no chance unless Ramondre is injured. Kamani Vidal could just be the leading rush. He could be. I think the range 280 rushing attempts or whatever for him this season. Yeah.
All right, Davis. Before I let you go, you're the king of some spicy takes. You like the clickbait, as we talked about earlier.
God, I do love it.
Give me one hot take for the 2024 fantasy football season. It could be anything. It could be about roster construction, about a particular player. Just give me anything. I need a Davis fire take.
I'll even theme it for this show. Justin Fields is on the Best Ball Mania 5 winning roster. The Steelers start out 1-4. They say, you know what? Enough. We don't need this. We don't need to do the Russell Wilson experiment. Fields comes in, scores 22 points a game, running. He's a great runner. Actually fits so well with, weirdly enough, like he's like Desmond Ridder but like good. Desmond Ridder but like not awful.
Yeah, not awful. That's right.
Yeah. Desmond Ridder but not awful. And like we've seen that work with Arthur Smith. I don't know how much I believe in this hot take because like I've been drafting a lot of Justin Fields, but maybe I should back off of it because there was the Athletic report. Mark Cabali put it out this week.
Yeah.
Like 100% Russell Wilson starting week 1. It's not a question.
Yeah.
Like it's just happening. But of all the guys who were going after like pick 150, I'm like, yeah, that guy can score 30 points in week 17. And it'll be pretty unique too.
Yeah, I like it. Davis, thank you for hopping on. Let everyone know where they can find you.
You can watch me every day on TV, SportsGrid. If you have free ad-supported television, sportsgrid.com. You can listen to the SportsGrid Fantasy Football Podcast or the TakeCast. If you just search my name in your podcatcher, all that stuff will show up.
And I'm JJ. You can find me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. All my stuff, as usual, over on LateRound.com. You can right now pre-order the Late Round Draft Guide, or you can just sign up over on Underdog and make a deposit. Use promo code LateRound, and you will get a free draft guide when it launches on July 1st. On behalf of myself and Davis, as always, everyone, thank you for tuning in.